Just a reminder before we begin, this video will be covering chapters that haven't been adapted into the anime yet. If you're only watching the anime, come back later. I'm still trying to keep the thumbnails from giving away anything massive, and there are a few images here that would have been great to use, but I'm still trying to keep you safe. So yes, if you want to avoid spoilers, come back to this video after you've seen the episode in July. If you're still here, we've got big things to talk about, very big. As I continue this final stretch of the Bleach manga, we still have one particularly giant obstacle to overcome. Gerard Valkyrie, the miracle that he is, stomping around the city like he's Godzilla, taking on most of our remaining cast at once. With a power like Gerard's, it's been set up that it's gonna take a lot to bring him down, and it gives Kubo reason to throw like everything at him, and he does, as everyone tries to bring this colossus down, but are only making him stronger. We've had Rukia, Byakuya, Renji, Shinji, Momo, and the Visored all take shots at him, and it seems like the Visored are set up to be given a more expanded role in the anime, but we'll see in July. That has me excited. Even with all of those people, Gerard is still kind of single-handedly beating them, but his stomping around is slowed down when Captain Hitsugaya shows up, having been unzombified previously by our war MVP Mayuri. Hitsugaya coming back is one that I have less issue with, because he wasn't really dead. He'd just been hit with Gigi's blood and wasn't killed beforehand, I don't think, so it makes sense it could be reversed, like there was still a chance. So I don't really have as much of an issue. It's not really reviving him. But yeah, Hitsugaya is here to save the day, though his ice only slows Gerard down for a minute before he continues. For a second, it looks like this will turn into a 2-on-1 with Byakuya helping, since they're the only two left standing, until my boy Kenpachi Zaraki arrives to give some assistance. And by assistance, I mean to take over. How pathetic. Kenny. Okay, I feel like Kenpachi hype. Alright, now we are ready to continue the chapters. I love that the first thing Kenny does when he wakes up from the healing pod is to go running to the next battle, because of course that's what he would do, and after being used as kind of a guinea pig by Mayuri, and being a little bit warped to establish Pernita as a big threat, it's exciting to see Kenny really have a chance to dive into the action again, and he never fails to deliver the hype once he gets into it. Not ever. The first thing that happens when Kenpachi shows up is he cuts Gerard's skyscraper-sized arms off when everyone else couldn't put any dents into him. It was so awesome, because of course it was. It's Kenny. But naturally, Gerard's arms come back even stronger because of his power, and that almost makes him the ideal kind of opponent for Kenpachi Zaraki. Kenny would love to fight someone that he can keep on slicing apart, and will only get more and more challenging as he does. The fun will never end, essentially. So naturally, Kenny is very excited to keep fighting him, even when there's a risk that Gerard could fall from the Soul King's palace at his size, and that would destroy the Serite below, like he'd just turn into a meteor. But Kenny has also chopped up meteors before, so maybe there's that. But yeah, he doesn't really seem to care about that risk. He's just all in on the fight. I love the scale of this battle, as entire towers are tossed like spears, and people are just being launched across the city. Even just on an opponent level, seeing someone like Kenny looking so tiny compared to Gerard, but still showing his power, is so fun. It all feels properly big and exciting, and I was super into this part of the fight. I really did love when Kenpachi first released his Shikai a while back, but I really like that this time his comrades are actually seeing it. They're obviously surprised, because as long as they've known Kenny, he's never been able to release his Zanpakuto. But my favorite bit is when Byakuya realizes that the explanation that Kenny's Zanpakuto was in a state of permanent release may not have just been wrong, but that the whole idea of permanent releases being a thing at all may have been entirely made up, and from my understanding, a fabrication maybe that the Central 46 made to try to hide Kenny's true power or keep him from trying to attain more. It would make some sense. We know they were scared that he would grow too strong, and they even limited his training, so this may have been another way to hamper his growth and stifle his potential capabilities. Just say like, oh yeah, you don't need to try to release your Zanpakuto, it's already always released. You're good. And people would believe it, because he was just that strong with a sealed Zanpakuto. Speaking of swords, Gerard's sword being literally made from hope is a pretty wacky concept, but I like it. I've been thinking a lot these past couple weeks about Gerard being the heart of the Soul King. It was such a quick little lore drop, and it hasn't been expanded upon here directly either. There might be something with that explains where this sword really comes from. It may relate to being the heart, considering how it's affected by the hopes and fears within people's hearts around him, and how his power seems tied to that almost feels like in a lot of media where the power of a god is dependent on others' prayers or feelings. I don't know, that's just where my mind went with this whole thing, and I like that, his sword is very much a personification of his power, whereas, Soul Reapers, their Zanpakuto, are very much connected to who they are. And Gerard's love of battle has been clear since we first saw him, which is another reason that naturally makes him a good enemy for Kenpachi, and I loved the competitiveness between the two of them. They're both just so excited to take on someone unrelenting, who's also in it for the love of the game, and Kenny's willing to attack anyone that gets in the way, even fellow captains, which is just such a Kenny thing to do. But even then, it's clear that Kenpachi, even with his Shikai, is outmatched. I didn't even notice that he had taken his eye patch off until Hitsugaya mentioned it, and that's such a great little reveal. He's already trying. That's proof that he's already not underestimating Gerard. It was a great way to show that this isn't going to be an easy fight. But everything changes when Yashiru shows up out of nowhere. We haven't seen her since Kenny activated his Shikai, and you might remember that that's when it clicked for me that she might be Kenpachi's Zanpakuto spirit. And now we have confirmation. I was correct in how I read that scene, and I'm very proud of myself for that. She is actually Kenpachi's Zanpakuto spirit, being his biggest supporter and companion, and only now, after all of his growth lately, is he able to really see that. Knowing that now, it's worth really diving into Yashiru and what she might represent. It's always been an interesting dichotomy that this giant man is such good pals with someone that seemed like a bubbly child. But now that we know what she really is, for me it seems clear that she kind of is a lot of parts of him, perhaps all the parts of him. As his most enthusiastic cheerleader, she is an echo of his love of battle and the pure childlike glee he always seems to have during fights. Her appearance may even somewhat represent the child that Kenpachi never really got to be, the innocence that was drowned in all of the spilled blood, a piece of him that was lost, and he never got to really embrace, that had to be something else. A childhood that should have been completely separate from the violent life that he lived. That's another potential angle, and obviously her being named after Yashiru Unohana makes a connection to the woman that inspired and fascinated Kenny most, who herself was an analog for his desire to fight strong opponents. Yashiru really is the perfect personification of Kenpachi Zaraki's inner spirit, even if you wouldn't think so at first glance. She's always backed up his desire to fight, she's always looked very happy and excited about fights, and she was always there with him at all times. I am so glad that this turned out to be the case. It's the kind of fun twist that's so interesting to look back on, and I loved how it was subtly revealed earlier in the arc as well. I really wasn't sure that we'd ever see her again, because he'd finally spoken his sword's name, but she returns when he needs her, just like Zangetsu does for Ichigo, and she tells him that he needs to wield her properly to unleash a power called Bankai. Now, for any of you that have been keeping up with this journey, you know how much I've been looking forward to this ever since the Soul Society arc, and we took one giant step toward this when he learned his sword's name and when he got his Shikai, but the hope that Kenny would one day unleash his Bankai was always baked into his whole arc of trying to understand his sword, trying to understand himself. I was always waiting for that. You could feel there was a lingering big payoff for his journey just waiting to happen. A journey of fully understanding himself and his power to go beyond the limits he had placed on himself. And naturally, just the prospect of seeing Kenpachi Zaraki's Bankai always gave me chills. So the idea that we were about to finally see it, it was such a great moment. Great build up along with the confirmation about Yashiru. So good. And he says it. Kenny unleashes his Bankai. And this design, it surprised me in the best ways, with Kenny's skin turning red and horns coming from his head, giving him this demonic appearance that perfectly suited how he is in this state. This is what's really been lurking beneath the whole time, like the bloodlust in him is finally able to fully reveal itself, personified, ravenous. It's kind of glorious to behold him attaining this state of being, because you know that it's probably euphoric for a guy that's always been doing whatever he can to satiate his need for battle, and now he really can. Whoa! The broken sword is an interesting thing as well. I'm not sure if that represents that he doesn't fully have, a grasp on this power yet, as we eventually see. But is it just representing how wild he is, that he doesn't really need the blade because it's himself that's, the blade? I don't know. What I do know is that with this power, he utterly wrecks Gerard. Like, so good. Gerard is split apart vertically, and you would think that would be enough to kill him. Yeah, I guess not. I guess not. And unfortunately for Kenny, his body can't handle his own power, which gave me some flashbacks to when Gremmy tried to imagine Kenpachi's power and it started ripping him apart from the inside. You kind of get a little bit of that here too. I'm curious if Kenny's power is so vast that it'll always be too much to contain, or if he could someday build himself up enough to fully harness it without consequences, or if he becomes stronger, will that potential power within him just become, harder and harder to reach? Will he never be able to reach it? I don't know. Considering the man wasn't allowed to really actually train except for like one single day, it's hard to say. But Kenny isn't the only one showing some new things. Hitsugaya has always had these ice shards encircling him when he uses his Bankai, and it seemed like it was a ticking clock that visualized how long he could stay in his Bankai maybe, but that turns out not to be the case. No, instead it was showing the state of maturity that his Zanpakuto was in, because apparently it hasn't fully matured, probably because of his age, and when it does, it's so powerful that Hitsugaya's physical form matures along with it to compensate for the power surge. So his body ages up into an adult, and he looks like this. It's a heartthrob. So it's kind of a Super Saiyan 4 Goku situation, where the transformation ages him up to accommodate being able to handle the transformation at all, except this feels like a better payoff to me than that did. I always liked the Super Saiyan 4 design and the concept, but as with everything with GT, I wasn't huge on the execution. I like this much more, even though it also, wasn't really hinted at that much, but there were thematic stepping stones toward this reveal, I would say. Maturity has always been an inherent theme with Hitsugaya as a character. Obviously, he's the youngest of the captains, and that's always been pointed out, and yet, maybe because of that, he has always strived extra hard to act very mature despite his physical appearance as a younger Soul Reaper. Even his whole "call me Captain Hitsugaya" running gag is someone kind of trying extra hard to be treated like an adult. And yes, he's actually much older than he appears because of, Soul Reapers aging, but comparatively to his peers, he's still a young guy. So thematically, there might be some good connections to make between him being frozen in time in a sense, waiting to be thawed, waiting to mature, with ice being his defining power. That his power's really being saved for later. The idea of him being this prodigy that's impressive for his age, with a huge amount of potential in the future, has also always hung over his character. I still think about Shunsui saying that in 100 years Hitsugaya will be maybe even more powerful than him. And now, it's like we actually get a sneak peek of what Shunsui was talking about. Because Hitsugaya's power in this form is actually kind of insane. Again, Soul Reaper aging rates are a little hard to wrap my head around, but if this is what he will be in 100 years, and I assume this is how he might look in a century, then Shunsui was absolutely right. Hitsugaya is on a whole other level like this that was reminding me more of the kind of plane of power that Yamamoto was on, where it feels more like a terrifying force of nature that's almost effortless than it does, someone fighting. We only get a few pages of seeing it in action, unfortunately, but it's wild. He can instantly freeze all matter that gets near him. There's no beams or pillars of ice as he's swinging his sword around. No, it just happens between panels. That really emphasizes how instantaneous the freezing is. 1 second someone looks fine, the next they're absolutely covered in ice. And apparently, he can even freeze hope itself when Gerard's sword effects are petrified and no longer work. He froze hope itself. It's so badass. And I like to see Hitsugaya do well because, as we've talked about many times in this series, he doesn't usually get many satisfying wins. Or at least ones that aren't kind of negated soon after by something. Hitsugaya just typically draws the short end of the stick in fights, and even his most badass fight in the war before this was arguably when he was a zombie, and not even himself. But here, at least for a few brief moments, Hitsugaya is completely in control and mature and a responsible, tax-paying adult. I've gotta wonder, what would have happened if his Bankai had a chance to mature when he tried to use it against Aizen that first time? How much of the series would have been different if this heartthrob showed up then? Or would it have mattered? Hard to say, since Aizen didn't remotely give him that chance. But I would have liked to have seen how this Hitsugaya would have done in that situation. And his whole shtick was also reminding me a little bit of Iceman from X-Men, where maturity is a big part of his character too, having been the youngest of the original 5, but with an insane amount of untapped potential as an Omega level mutant eventually. Maybe it's just the ice powers, or maybe ice powers help drive home the idea of frozen states of being. I don't know, but this reminded me of that a little bit. On a side note, I wish Rangiku had something to do here. With how this arc had been giving these nice moments and climactic resolutions to the relationships between some of the captains and lieutenants, I think this would have been a good opportunity to do something great with Hitsugaya and Rangiku. I feel like of all the captains and lieutenant pairings, their dynamic is often shown the most, so I would have loved a deep and emotional payoff to all of those many scenes we've seen between them. And really, I would have just loved to have seen Rangiku's reaction to this adult Hitsugaya. The reaction that Renji and Rukia give is hilarious, believing that he's Hitsugaya's brother, and the best part is that Hitsugaya just goes along with it. So funny. But for a second, yeah, I really did think this would be the solution to defeating Gerard Valkyrie. Since hurting him only makes him stronger, maybe he needs to be beaten in a way that doesn't actually cut him, but instead just stops him, fully neutralizes him. But nope, despite how quickly and completely he froze Gerard, naturally it wasn't enough, because this is Gerard Valkyrie, and nothing ever seems to be enough. He just keeps on going, until Byakuya jumps in. Byakuya Kuchiki's big moment here when he attacks emphasizes this need for teamwork, as he unleashes what's apparently his Bankai's ultimate technique. It's a cool variation of what we're used to with him, and it seems to deal the finishing blow. Yeah, totally the finishing blow. There's no way, right? There's no way. Even still, this felt a little bit underwhelming compared to what Kenny and Hitsugaya were giving us, to be honest, and it almost felt like an afterthought next to what those two other Soul Reapers had going on during these chapters. We've had these big hype revelations, transformations, and character beats for Hitsugaya and Kenpachi, moments that pay off things that have been set up throughout the series, their deeper connections to their Zanpakuto, reaching hidden potentials, both showing us these evolutions of who they really are at their core, while Byakuya just kind of throws an attack. You know what I mean? Outside of working in unison with others, which, he wouldn't have done at the beginning of the series, there's no real deeper thing happening for him here, and it's not really given much attention. It's a cool moment as far as the fight, but it's kind of just more of the same from him, at least in comparison to the others, which was a little underwhelming. I thought, if we're gonna have him be part of this, he should also have a comparatively profound moment as a character. There is a small little moment when Byakuya helps Hitsugaya from collapsing from the strain of his Bankai, so yeah, Byakuya has softened and is much more of a caring team player. It's a really nice beat, but I still wish we got something more substantial from him here than just that. He's obviously had great development throughout the series. I just kind of wanted a nice, powerful moment for him, like Kenpachi and Hitsugaya got. Yeah, working together and with Byakuya's final attack, the three captains take Gerard's head clean off, and it feels like a well-deserved victory in the moment. These are arguably the three most prominent captains in the series, the ones that we've spent the most time highlighting. So here at the end, it feels right that they're the ones working together to get this win, to have finally killed Gerard, until Gerard once again pulls off a miracle and gets back up. He will not stay down, no matter what they do to him, and he only comes back stronger and looking less and less like a person and more like an unstoppable force of nature. It makes sense given the nature of his ability. It absolutely makes sense. But damn, how the hell are we supposed to get out of this? Look at him now. He's just this monstrous celestial being that seems like it's made of pure cosmic creation. I don't know how we beat something like Gerard when some of our most important secondary characters have taken their shot and it still isn't enough. It's not looking good at all. It's looking really bad. Hello from the future, a little while after the initial recording for this video. I'm speaking as someone that's a little bit further into the manga now and not the sweet summer child that had only read the first part of the Gerard fight. Now I've read the conclusion of this battle, and this seems like the right place to put my thoughts on how this fight ends, since there was just a small part of it left anyway. So I am commandeering the original ending of this video as a much more learned man than I was back when I first started it. After being unable to destroy Gerard, who just keeps coming back stronger and stronger after throwing all kinds of things at him, it looks like nothing will work. Maybe they can figure something out, maybe there's a strategy or a plan or something that will really be this big payoff for this entire confrontation. Or maybe they'll just be saved by Yuabaha, who uses the Ausvalen to take the remaining Sternritter's powers back, and Gerard, the seemingly unstoppable juggernaut that's been fighting everyone and anyone, Gerard Valkyrie drops dead. Yeah, this is how he ends, I guess, from having his life force stripped away by his king. And I immediately had some thoughts on this, obviously. Gerard just turned into a skeleton, and he got killed by his power being taken back. Well, that's crazy. Is he really dead? I'm not sure I like that. How could you not? And I wanted to address it, and since this video wasn't out yet, this felt like the right place to talk about this. First off, I don't know how to really feel about this conclusion. I'm still processing it, but I don't think I like how this was wrapped up. After all of the struggles and all of the transformations and growth throughout this fight, and after all of the time we've spent reading it, watching it, it's wrapped up in a way that's not only sudden, but more frustratingly, doesn't even require our heroes, where Gerard is beaten by an outside force that interrupts the fight. It felt like suddenly Kubo plucked Gerard's action figure out of play and tossed it across the room, while everyone else is still playing. It feels like these big milestone moments, while great for the characters, are kind of robbed of their impact a bit when they didn't really amount to anything except taking up time and making Gerard's appearance change a bit. Yes, they were important personally for them as characters, so there is that, but I'd prefer that it all built towards something significant outside of being an excuse to show their growth, to show their strength, to have them essentially be punching a wall and they never bring the wall down. It would be more powerful if it was all done for a meaningful reason in the end, but if Kenny never used his Bankai and Hitsugaya never grew up, Gerard still would have died this way. Maybe a couple more Soul Reapers would have been killed in the meantime, but their efforts didn't change this ending or really end up contributing to his defeat, and that's a real shame. Yes, they may have saved some lives, yes, they had some powerful character moments, but when it comes to beating Gerard, they don't. It reminded me of what I don't like about a lot of Dragon Ball Z at times, most blatantly in the Buu saga, where we just repeatedly throw transformations and new attacks at the villain, seemingly just for the sake of showing off those abilities, while the enemy just keeps bouncing back until he's beaten by something else entirely. But at least it was still the heroes that beat Buu in the end there. We don't get that catharsis here. We aren't rewarded for how much time we spent desperately trying to find a way to win. None of the people fighting Gerard pull out the W, not a single one of them. It just isn't very satisfying as a reader, or even for the Soul Reapers, I'd imagine. We went through all of that trouble to not even really get the victory, but, there's a big but. At the same time, I legitimately don't know if there was another way to defeat Gerard given everything that we've seen and everything we know. It was made very, very clear that the usual methods wouldn't be enough. Our heroes were completely helpless against against Gerard, unable to kill him despite their very best efforts. That's the moment when you have the chance to give them a moment to find a way, but instead of that, they're rescued by almost literal divine intervention. It seemed to take a miracle in order to beat the miracle. When things were at their worst, a miracle happened and saved them. Maybe there's something to that. I don't really like that they don't beat Gerard, but there is something to that, I think. Even with that, was it anticlimactic, especially after how much time we spent? Yeah, unfortunately. It seemed like Kubo kinda painted himself into a corner with what Gerard's abilities could do, and this was the only way to get out of it. I really don't know, in-universe, how they would have been able to beat him if none of these things worked. I just don't know. This seemed like the only thing we know of in-universe that could actually neutralize him. Does that make it any better? I don't know. I compared the handling of Gerard favorably to Yami before and said my only concern was that Gerard would get beaten off screen like Yami. That thankfully didn't happen, but I don't know if being beaten by Yuabaha absorbing you out of the blue after being so unstoppable was much better, sadly. Like, at the very least, and you know I have my issues with everything related to Yami, at the very least, our heroes did actually defeat Yami, even if we didn't get to see it. That being said, I still much prefer Gerard to Yami overall, it's not even close, but yeah, I guess a more apt comparison could be comparing this to how Harabel was beaten in the Arankar arc, where the big bad took out their underling rather than one of the heroes doing it, and ironically, Hitsugaya was also fighting her. Only I think the Gerard one was worse than that because we didn't spend nearly as much time wanting to see Harabel get beaten. There wasn't as many people involved, and it wasn't taking as long. With the Gerard fight, it felt like with each person and method that failed to stop Gerard, we were maybe building up to finding out what could actually topple him, but it ended up being something the Soul Reapers couldn't even bring to the table. They never would have been able to Ausvalen him to death. It's fiction, so of course another way of winning could have been created, but would it have made sense given everything we've seen within the story? Would it have felt like an ass pull? I don't know. It would be tough to come up with something that would logically work given the Miracle's capabilities, I think, unless there's some other element in the Bleach universe I'm not thinking about. I'm thinking about the fact that my Fullbringers still haven't shown up. Could they have been involved in this? I'm trying to think, could we have done something with Tsukishima that could have beaten him? I don't know. The timer powers with Giriko? I'm just trying to think of what could have possibly, something that naturally is already around in the story, what could have beaten him? It's really hard to say, so maybe as unceremonious as this was, as kind of disappointing as this was, maybe it really was the only way out of this, but I still wish it wasn't. It makes sense logically within the story, but isn't very satisfying, you know? I think that's my problem with it, is he got taken out in a way that I don't feel particularly great about, but I also couldn't tell you, after everything, how else this could have worked. I don't know. I've got to think more on it. Obviously, I'm a little conflicted, but I also don't know what other options we had. I have been told many times that the ending to the manga is kind of rushed, and the end of this fight was really the first time I had that feeling. It's like we needed a quick resolution, so Kubo just kind of pulled the plug on Gerard. It was almost as if it wasn't Yuabaha, but Kubo himself performing the Ausvalen, absorbing his character back into his being to muster enough power for whatever he plans to do for the last few chapters of the story. This is the end of the road for Gerard Valkyrie. He was a fun presence. He wasn't exactly a super deep character as far as we know, but I mean, he was really just this massive obstacle for people to hit. As I've said before, I still liked his vibe, and he was very intimidating, and I enjoy characters that love to battle, even more fun. The real question is whether or not getting killed like this counts as dying in battle. So can this Viking-inspired warrior go to Valhalla? I did really love so many things in this fight. There were such hype character moments and things like Kenny's Bankai that I've been dreaming about for years. And it delivered. I could have used even more of it. It does feel a little bit like some of these big transformations, even Urahara's in the last batch of chapters, aren't getting much time. Like it's kind of like half a chapter or even a few pages. But I did love what I saw. So I'm holding on to those great scenes looking back on these chapters because the ending could have been been more fulfilling than it was. Maybe the Thousand Year Blood War anime can make some changes to alleviate how this is resolved, but that may be too drastic of a change, I don't know. Like I've said, I'm not sure how exactly to go about it, or what other options there were, but I'd just like it to be more fulfilling than what we ended up with. That's all. Still fun, great moments, my boy Kenpachi being awesome, but yeah, I could have used a little bit better of an ending, and we'll see if that changes in a few months. Until then, I'll just hope for a miracle. As always, thanks so much for watching, guys. If you want to see more, there's hours and hours of manga read-alongs and episode reactions on the Patreon. Love to have you over there, reading Tokyo Ghoul right now, watching the filler anime arcs of Bleach. But if you'd like to see more here on the channel, please subscribe. And we are very close to the end of the Bleach manga now. Very, very, very close. So, yeah, I'll see you guys soon. Take care.